It was just after midnight when Sam pulled off the two-lane highway and into the gravel lot of the old rest stop. The "Open 24 Hours" sign flickered half-heartedly above the rusted bathroom shelter, barely illuminating the cracked pavement and a solitary vending machine humming beside it. The place was empty, except for a single pickup truck parked crookedly at the far end, its windows fogged over. Sam had been on the road for nearly 8 hours, trying to make it from Boise to a small town in eastern Wyoming before the sun came up. He hadn't meant to be driving this late, but a client meeting had gone long, and a thunderstorm had delayed him more than an hour. By the time the rain cleared, he was miles from the nearest motel, and the idea of sleeping in his car at a rest stop seemed like the only viable option. He pulled into a space closest to the bathroom, killed the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. The night was unnaturally still. No wind, no bugs, no distant highway noise, nothing. Just the steady hum of the vending machine and the occasional creak of his cooling engine. He glanced at his phone. No bars. He was deep in the mountains now, wedged between two stretches of national forest. No signal for miles. The nearest town, if he remembered correctly, was over 40 miles back. With a sigh, he got out of the car and stretched. The air was cool, with that piney, almost metallic smell that only came in high elevations. His boots crunched the gravel as he walked over to the bathroom shelter. The men's room door creaked open too easily, swinging into a dim, flickering fluorescent light. The stall doors were graffiti-covered and barely hanging on their hinges. A layer of dust coated everything, even though the sink still dripped water every few seconds. He finished quickly, keeping an eye on the shadows in the corners, then headed back to his car. He locked the doors and reclined his seat, tugging his jacket up around his neck. The interior of the car was still warm, but something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it. Maybe the silence was just too complete. Even at night, you usually heard something, a far-off truck, an owl, the wind. But here there was only the faint vibration of his car cooling down. Just as he began to drift off, he saw movement in the side mirror. It was faint, a figure walking past the back of his car, just at the edge of the dim rest stop lighting. He sat up instantly, pulse spiking. His breath fogged the window as he stared out into the dark. Nothing. He waited, heart racing, and saw nothing else move. The figure had been too tall to be a coyote or a deer, too human in shape. He rubbed his eyes. Maybe he just imagined it. The long drive, exhaustion, isolation, it was getting to him, but then there was a sound. A sharp tap on the driver's side window. He jumped, spinning toward the noise, but there was no one there. Just condensation on the glass and the deep dark of the forest beyond. Another tap, this time on the rear passenger window. He turned quickly, but again, no one. No footprints in the gravel, no shifting shadows. He clicked on the interior light, suddenly needing to banish the darkness from inside the car. He waited. Nothing happened. After 10 minutes, he turned the light off and tried to settle back into his seat, convincing himself it had to be nerves or a stray animal. But even then, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him from just beyond the reach of the light. At 1:43 a.m., his car alarm went off. The blaring horn startled him awake, the lights flashing wildly in the dark lot. He fumbled for the key fob, pressing buttons until it finally stopped. His heart was pounding as he looked around. Still, no one. The old pickup truck at the far end hadn't moved. No headlights, no doors ajar. He opened the door cautiously and stepped out into the cool air. That's when he saw it. Footprints. Dozens of them, surrounding his car. Bare feet imprinted in the dust and gravel, circling his vehicle in every direction. Some large, some small, some looking like they'd been running, others walking slowly. But they all led nowhere. No trail to or from the forest, no approach from the shelter. Just dozens of footprints that ended around his car as if they had appeared there. He turned in a slow circle, eyes straining into the dark. Then he heard something behind him. A low whisper. So faint he thought it was the wind at first. But it wasn't wind. It was words, almost hissed. He sees you. He spun, but there was no one. He backed toward his car, heart slamming in his chest, yanked open the door and slammed it behind him, locking it instantly. He didn't care how tired he was now. He was leaving. The engine stuttered once before starting, and the headlights flared to life. That's when he saw the woman. She was standing at the edge of the trees, just outside the range of the light. Pale, tall, wearing what looked like an old hospital gown. Her hair hung wet and stringy around her face, and even from the distance he could see her eyes, wide, unblinking, glowing faintly in the dark. He hit the gas. Gravel flew as he tore out of the rest stop, tires screeching as he swerved back onto the empty road. He didn't stop for 20 miles. Eventually he pulled over at a brightly lit truck stop with several rigs parked out front. He sat there in the cab, panting, hands gripping the wheel. He hadn't hallucinated those footprints. He hadn't imagined the alarm or the whispers or her. The next morning, with sunlight warming his windshield, he cautiously returned to the rest stop. It was empty. The old pickup was gone. No footprints. The dust and gravel around where he'd parked looked undisturbed. He walked slowly around the lot. Nothing, not even a mark where his car had been. The vending machine was still humming, the bathroom shelter still grim and broken-looking. But as he passed the bathroom door, he noticed something scratched into the metal, something he swore hadn't been there before. It read, "You were lucky. He likes the lonely ones." Sam didn't stop driving until he reached his destination, and even then, he slept with the light on in his motel room. Over the following weeks, he tried to research the area, scouring local news archives, obscure forums, ghost story blogs, but he found almost nothing. Just one old post from 2009 on a now defunct forum about trucker folklore, talking about a rest stop deep in the Boise National Forest. It said something about people going missing there, a few names, a warning. If you're driving alone at night, don't stop between mile markers 172 and 181. That place ain't right. There were no police reports, no official records, just whispers on the internet. A few of the missing names matched obituaries, others didn't. He tried putting it out of his mind, but the dream started. Always the same. The rest stop, the footprints, and the woman at the edge of the woods. Sometimes in the dream, she was closer, smiling. One night, he woke up to find the same barefoot prints on his apartment balcony, 3 stories up. No one believed him. Friends thought he was sleep-deprived or making it up. He started keeping the TV on all night, moved out of his apartment, even got rid of the car. But it didn't matter. The last thing he remembers clearly was waking up one night, not in his bed, but in the driver's seat of his old car. Back at that same rest stop, only this time the headlights were already on, and she was already walking toward him. Story the end. It was sometime after 2 a.m. when I first heard the sound coming from downstairs. Not loud, not even really distinct, just a faint, dragging noise. I'd been lying in bed, half awake, scrolling through nothing on my phone, trying to exhaust myself to sleep. I paused and listened. At first I thought it might have been the house settling. You tell yourself things like that when you live alone, especially in a creaky old farmhouse on the edge of town like mine. The place had been in my family for decades, inherited from my grandfather. I moved in 6 months earlier after breaking up with my fiancée. It was cheaper than city rent, and at the time, I liked the quiet. It sat on about 4 acres of empty fields surrounded by tree line, and the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. Most nights you could hear the wind rattling through the trees, or sometimes the coyotes yelping from the woods. But this was different. This was inside the house. I got up slowly, heart already beating faster than it should. I didn't grab a weapon. I never felt the need. Instead, I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and made my way into the hallway, stepping lightly. I didn't bother turning on the light. The bulb in the ceiling fixture had blown weeks ago, and I hadn't replaced it yet. The hallway stretched toward the stairs at the far end, dim and quiet, the floorboards cold against my feet. The dragging noise came again. This time I was sure it was from the kitchen, something heavy sliding across the tile. My stomach tightened. I held my breath and moved closer to the stairs, avoiding the 4th step that always creaked. When I reached the bottom, I listened again. Nothing. I flicked on the flashlight and shined it around the living room. All clear. Then slowly I pushed the kitchen door open. I scanned the counters, the table, the floor. Everything looked untouched. The fridge hummed softly. No sign of anything amiss. I turned and froze. There were muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. Big ones. Bare. They started near the back door, which was still locked from the inside, and led toward the basement door on the opposite side of the room. I backed away instinctively, nearly bumping into a chair. My first thought was that someone had broken in, maybe a transient or a drunk. But how would they get in with all the doors locked? There were no broken windows, no forced entry, and even if they did get in, how did they walk in barefoot, dragging mud, without making a sound before? I stood there for a while just listening, trying to rationalize it. Then the dragging sound came again, from the basement. Something deep inside me rejected the idea of opening that door. I wanted to believe it was some raccoon or possum that got in somehow, dragging something. But it was just too weird. The footprints, the silence, the feeling I was being watched. Still, I couldn't leave it alone. I approached the basement door, my flashlight beam shaking slightly. I wrapped my fingers around the knob and turned it slowly. It opened with a groan. The stairwell down was pitch black, the wooden steps descending into nothing. I shined the light down, nothing but dust and old cobwebs. Then something moved. Not fast, just enough. A flicker of movement near the bottom. My light caught it for a second, something pale like a shoulder or a face slipping out of view. I slammed the door and locked it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my room with the door locked, flashlight by my side, phone in my hand. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? I saw something pale in my basement. I didn't have evidence, just footprints and fear. The next morning, in the light of day, I forced myself to check again. I unlocked the basement door and crept down the stairs, flashlight and now a crowbar in hand. The smell hit me first, old mildew, damp wood, something metallic. The footprints were still there, faint but visible. I followed them. They stopped near an old wooden cabinet in the corner. The thing was covered in dust and hadn't been touched in years, at least not by me. I hesitated, then yanked the doors open. Empty. Just broken jars and cobwebs. I tried to move on. Over the next few days, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, mixed with lack of sleep and stress. But it wasn't over. At night, I began waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every time, like clockwork. I'd open my eyes and feel an immediate sense of dread. The house would be silent, but I'd be paralyzed with fear. Once, I swore I saw something in the corner of my bedroom. Tall, thin, motionless. When I blinked, it was gone. Another night, I found the kitchen chairs stacked on top of each other in a way that defied balance. The back door was wide open, despite being locked when I went to bed. One time, I woke up with dirt on my feet and no memory of leaving the bed. The worst was the voice. It began faintly, like whispers under a floorboard. I could never quite make out what it said, but it was always at the same time. 3:17. Sometimes I'd feel hot breath against my ear, like someone leaning in from behind. Once it said my name. I started sleeping during the day and staying up all night, lights on, TV playing softly to mask the silence. I avoided the basement entirely. One evening, I called my Uncle Jim, who grew up in this house. I didn't tell him everything, just asked if he remembered anything weird about it. There was a long pause on the line before he said, "You should have asked before moving in." He told me something I didn't know, something no one had mentioned at the time. Back in the 1970s, my great-uncle Raymond lived in the basement after coming back from Vietnam. He wasn't right afterward. Paranoid. Violent. The family kept him down there so he wouldn't scare the kids. One night during a thunderstorm, he disappeared. They found his footprints leading out the basement door into the fields, but he was never seen again. The weird thing, Jim said, was that the footprints matched those in the kitchen. Bare. Muddy. After that call, things escalated. Whatever was in the house started mimicking voices. Mine, my mother's, even my ex's. I'd hear someone calling me from the hallway, but when I checked, it was empty. Doors would slam behind me. The attic trapdoor in the hallway would creak open in the middle of the night. I tried staying at a motel once, but I kept waking up with scratches along my arms. When I returned home, the scratches stopped. It was as if whatever it was didn't want me to leave. One night at 3:17, I woke up choking. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I felt hands, cold, heavy, pressing down on my chest. I looked around, wide-eyed, and saw a shape looming above me. A pale, eyeless face, no mouth. Just skin, stretched and rotting. It leaned closer until I passed out. When I woke, the clock read 4:09. My throat was sore like someone had gripped it. I set up a camera in my room after that. Just one. Pointed at the bed. I didn't want to see what happened in the rest of the house. The footage, when I reviewed it, made me nearly throw up. At 3:17 a.m., the camera began to flicker. Then it went dark for 6 full seconds. When it came back, there was something crouched at the foot of the bed. Gaunt. Bare. Its skin was gray and sagging, arms long and hanging too low, head cocked at a sickening angle. It didn't move, just stared at me sleeping. I moved out 2 days later, left everything, found an apartment in the city, and never looked back. But I still wake up at 3:17 sometimes. Last month, I came home from work late and found muddy footprints in my hallway. Story the end. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Sarah's car rolled to a stop on the gravel driveway of the old farmhouse she'd just inherited. The surrounding darkness was so deep it felt thick, like the air was weighed down with it. Her headlights illuminated the front of the house, revealing chipped white paint, a sagging porch, and windows like dead eyes. She hadn't wanted to come out here. Not really. But with her mother gone and no other close relatives left, the house had fallen into her lap by default. She figured she'd spend a few nights sorting through old furniture and keepsakes, maybe get the place appraised and sell it off. The gravel crunched under her boots as she got out of the car, glancing uneasily toward the tree line that hemmed in the property. The wind stirred the tops of the trees, but the air at ground level was utterly still. No bugs chirping, no frogs, just silence. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Flashlight beams sweeping over dust-covered furniture, old photographs in tarnished frames, and yellowed wallpaper curling at the corners. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something older, like damp earth mixed with rot. Sarah left her overnight bag by the couch and went straight for the kitchen, where she'd been told the fuse box was. The old farmhouse had electricity, but the power hadn't been on in years. She flipped the main breaker. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. The realtor had warned her this might happen. Wires might have degraded or gotten chewed by rats. At least her flashlight was fully charged. She poured herself a glass of water from the jug she'd brought and made a bed on the couch with the sleeping bag she'd packed. She didn't want to go upstairs yet. She couldn't explain why, but something about the narrow staircase and the dark yawning above it made her skin crawl. The wind picked up outside, making the old wooden frame of the house creak and moan. It was an eerie, mournful sound. She curled deeper into her sleeping bag, pulling it tight around her as if it could shield her from the unease curling in her gut. At around 3:30, Sarah was jolted awake by a sound she couldn't immediately place. She froze, heart pounding. At first, there was nothing, just the groaning of the house and the distant hush of wind. Then it came again, a soft thump. It wasn't outside, it was upstairs. She sat up slowly, the flashlight trembling slightly in her hand as she turned it toward the staircase. The sound came again, soft, deliberate, like someone taking a single step and pausing. She told herself it was probably just the house settling. Old wood expands and contracts. Things shift. That was normal. But then there was another sound, a low, dragging shuffle. Sarah stood and crept toward the base of the stairs. Flashlight trained up the narrow steps. The beam landed on the top landing, illuminating nothing but peeling wallpaper and a faded runner rug. She didn't move. Her breath felt loud in her chest. The house was utterly still now, as though it was waiting. She turned the flashlight away and stepped back, deciding to sleep in her locked car instead. But just as she turned to leave, she heard a voice. Quiet. Hoarse. Sarah. She froze. She didn't want to look back up the stairs. Every instinct told her not to. Sarah, the voice said again. Closer now. More urgent. She bolted. Fumbled with the lock on the front door, practically falling through it onto the porch as she sprinted for her car. She slammed the door, locked it, and sat there panting. Her flashlight flicked off, and in the sudden pitch darkness, she realized she was crying. She spent the rest of the night in the car, lights off, gripping her car keys like a weapon. But the voice didn't return, and she didn't hear anything else. The next morning, in the safe comfort of daylight, she told herself it had been a dream. That stress and exhaustion had gotten the better of her. She hadn't slept well in days. Maybe she'd been dreaming with her eyes open. Maybe she'd imagined it. She forced herself to go back inside, determined not to be chased off by what was probably nothing. Upstairs, the air was heavier. The bedrooms were sparse, old beds with dusty quilts, a wardrobe in each room, and more of those old photographs. People she didn't recognize. Eyes that seemed just slightly wrong, too intense, too knowing. One room at the end of the hall was different. The door was locked with a rusted bolt, the wood around it scratched, like someone had clawed at it, trying to get out. She found the key in a drawer downstairs and returned to the door, heart thudding. It took a minute of jiggling the key to turn the lock. The bolt slid back with a groan. Inside was a small room, completely empty, except for a rocking chair that faced the corner. She shined the flashlight around. No windows, no closets, just that chair. Then something clicked inside the room, and the flashlight flickered. The chair began to rock. She froze, not breathing, staring at it. The chair rocked forward, and then stopped. Silence. Sarah backed out slowly, pulled the door shut, and locked it again. She left the house by dusk that day, her nerves frayed. As she drove back into town, she told herself again that it was just an old house playing tricks on her. There were logical explanations, but that night in her apartment around 3:30, she heard it again. A soft thump, then a pause, then dragging. Sarah's apartment was on the second floor. No one lived above her. She sat up in bed, heart hammering. The sound came again, closer. A thump and drag, like someone was crawling slowly toward her down the hallway. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The hallway outside her bedroom was empty. She left all the lights on the rest of the night. In the morning, she found the front door slightly ajar. Nothing seemed to be missing. There were no signs of forced entry, but the lock was unlatched from the inside. The next day, she returned to the farmhouse with a friend, Aaron, someone she trusted who didn't think she was crazy when she told him about what had happened. He offered to stay with her for a few nights and help go through the house. Together, they reopened the locked room. The rocking chair was still there, still facing the corner. Aaron walked in first, arms crossed. "It's just a chair," he said, giving it a nudge. It didn't rock. Sarah stayed in the doorway. Something about the air in that room made her skin prickle. Aaron turned around and said, "Seriously, I think you're just scaring yourself." That night, they both slept downstairs. Sarah on the couch, Aaron on an air mattress beside her. Around 3:30, Sarah woke again. Aaron wasn't on the mattress. She sat up quickly, flashlight already in hand. Then she heard it, rocking. Upstairs. She ran up the stairs, calling Aaron's name. The locked door was open. The chair was rocking, and Aaron was standing in the corner, facing the wall, completely still. She stepped into the room and touched his shoulder. He turned around slowly. His eyes were wide and his mouth was moving, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, he shoved her out of the room and slammed the door shut from inside. Sarah pounded on the door, screaming, but he wouldn't answer. Then she heard him speaking in a voice that didn't sound like him. "She's not yours. She belongs here." Sarah didn't wait. She ran down the stairs, out the front door, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. They followed her back out there an hour later, but the room was empty. No Aaron, no rocking chair. Gone. They searched the property, the woods, nearby roads, nothing. Aaron was never found. Sarah left town 2 days later. She never went back, but she didn't escape whatever followed her. It still happens sometimes. Always around 3:30 in the morning, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps, the soft drag of something being pulled across the floor, and sometimes a voice whispering from the shadows, "She belongs here." Sarah doesn't sleep at night anymore. Not really, because every time she closes her eyes, she sees the inside of that room, the rocking chair, and Aaron's wide, empty eyes. Story, the end. It was just past 1:30 a.m. when Aaron Richter pulled off the empty stretch of Route 44 and into the gravel driveway of a rundown rental property outside Groveland, Massachusetts. The house was small and sagging, nestled in a thicket of bare trees that looked more like crooked fingers than anything natural. He hadn't planned to stop here, hadn't even planned to be driving this late. But the fog had gotten too thick, and the light on his dashboard told him his tire pressure was low. Again. He'd found the house last minute on a travel app. Some local had listed it as a late-night roadside sanctuary for tired drivers. The pictures showed a rustic, single-story cabin. Nothing special, but it was cheap and less than 5 minutes from where he'd pulled over. He didn't think twice. When he parked, the gravel crunched loudly in the silence. There were no streetlights out here, just trees and darkness and a dense, creeping fog that clung to the windshield. Aaron stepped out and zipped his jacket up tight. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, and the stillness of the woods made him feel like he'd stepped into something unnatural. The porch light was on, but it flickered like it was shorting out. The air smelled faintly like mold and cold pine. He grabbed his duffel from the back seat and approached the front door. A digital keypad blinked on the side of the frame. He entered the code the app provided, 88113. The lock clicked. Inside, it was musty and dim, the kind of silence that made your own heartbeat sound too loud. The walls were wood-paneled and lined with water stains. A thin film of dust coated the table, the windowsills, even the old faux leather couch in the corner. The place had that unmistakable abandoned feel, like no one had lived here in months. Aaron tossed his duffel on the floor and checked his phone. No service. Of course, the bedroom was tiny. Just a full-sized bed with sunken springs, a cracked mirror on the wall, and a nightstand with an old rotary phone unplugged. He lay down with his clothes still on, jacket zipped up to his chin, boots kicked off and lined near the door. He was so tired, he didn't even bother to turn off the light. He woke to a creaking sound from the kitchen. Aaron blinked. The room was dark now. His phone said 3:07 a.m. He must have drifted off without meaning to. The ceiling above him creaked again. Then silence. He propped himself up on his elbows and listened. More creaking. Not the house settling. These were deliberate, steady footsteps. He reached for his phone and tapped the flashlight on. The creaking stopped. He waited. Then 3 sharp knocks at the bedroom door. Aaron sat up fast, flashlight trembling in his hand. The knocks didn't come again. He stared at the door. There was no one else here. No car in the driveway when he'd arrived. He was sure of it. He stood up slowly and approached the door. He put his ear to it. Nothing. Not even breathing. He waited a long moment, then turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty. Just ahead, the kitchen was barely lit by the porch light still flickering through the window. The front door was closed. Locked. He turned back to the room. That's when he noticed it. His boots were no longer by the door. They were side by side in the middle of the floor, pointing directly at the bed. Aaron stared at them for a long time, trying to remember if he might have kicked them further in while half asleep. But the placement was too perfect. Too deliberate. He picked them up slowly and returned them to the corner, brushing off a strange wave of nausea. Then he got back into bed, sitting, this time turning off the light. He didn't sleep. By 4:10 a.m., he had decided to leave. Fog or not, he didn't care. Something was wrong with the house, and every fiber in his body told him to get out. He grabbed his bag and walked out into the cold, gripping his keys so hard they dug into his palm. He barely noticed. The air outside was colder than before, and even though the trees were completely still, he could swear he heard leaves rustling. He turned to the car and froze. All 4 tires were flat, not deflated, slashed, ragged edges like something had torn them with a serrated blade. Aaron backed up a step and looked at the house. The porch light was still on, but now it wasn't flickering. It was glowing a steady red. He turned and ran. He followed the dirt driveway out toward the road, which wasn't easy to see now that the fog had thickened. He'd only gone 100 yards when he stopped short. The road wasn't there. He spun around. No driveway, no house, nothing. Just woods, just trees in every direction and a thick white haze. Aaron's breath hitched. He turned back the way he came, or thought he came. Started walking. 10 minutes, 20. Still no house, still no road. His flashlight flickered and died. Then laughter. It echoed from the woods around him, faint but clear. Childlike. High-pitched. Giggling. Aaron turned in a circle, panic rising in his chest. "Hello," he called. "Who's there?" Silence, then leaves crunching to his left. He spun and ran in the opposite direction, tripping over roots, branches snapping at his face. After what felt like half an hour, he saw the house again. It was right in front of him, the exact same spot. He hadn't moved. He was sure he'd been running in a straight line away from it, and yet here it was again, dark, still, waiting. He didn't want to go back inside. He almost didn't. But the cold was biting now, and his limbs felt slow, numb. He stepped onto the porch, and just as he reached for the knob, the front door creaked open by itself. The inside was darker than before, and colder. The air felt thick and wet, like the basement of an old house after a flood. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The moment the latch clicked, every light in the house turned on at once. Aaron froze. The kitchen, the hallway, even the overhead light in the bedroom, all glowing, too bright. But they weren't white. They were red. He turned to open the door again. It wouldn't budge. He yanked harder. The knob wouldn't turn. He tried the windows, nailed shut. He ran to the bedroom and found the mirror on the wall was now shattered. His reflection looked wrong. Not just cracked, but different, like it was smiling, and he wasn't. Aaron backed away from it. Behind him, the rotary phone on the nightstand began to ring. He jumped. It wasn't plugged in. It rang again, then again. He walked toward it slowly and picked up the receiver. Static, then a voice whispering. "Aaron," it said, "you're already here." He slammed it down and stumbled back into the hallway. The lights flickered violently, and the air pressure in the room dropped like something was sucking the oxygen out. Then the creaking started again. Above him. Not footsteps this time. Dragging. Like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Then the thud. A single heavy footstep. Aaron ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife he could find from the drawer. He pressed his back against the fridge, heart hammering, sweat freezing to his skin. The dragging sound grew louder. From the ceiling, dark liquid began to drip, slow at first, then faster. It landed on the tile next to him, thick and black. He looked up. A hand was reaching down through the ceiling. Not from the attic, not through a hole. Just phasing through the ceiling like it wasn't solid at all. The fingers were long and gray, the nails blackened. He screamed and ran. The house stretched around him. The hallway seemed to lengthen. The doors he passed led to nowhere. Blank walls, no closets, no exits. He ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door shut. It was quiet again. He crouched in the corner and waited, blade in hand, breathing ragged. That's when he noticed it. His boots were gone again. And the bed was made. But not just made. Something was lying under the covers. He moved forward, hand shaking, and slowly pulled the sheet down. It was him, his own body, eyes open, pale, cold. He stumbled back, gasping, and the mirror on the wall suddenly reformed. Whole again. He looked into it. This time his reflection didn't match. It wasn't him. It smiled, then blinked. Aaron didn't. The reflection stepped forward, and Aaron's world went black. They found the house 3 weeks later, after hikers reported a foul smell near the woods. The inside was destroyed. Furniture broken, glass shattered, walls smeared with something dark. But no sign of Aaron. His car was still in the driveway, tires shredded. Inside the bedroom, investigators found a made bed and a pair of boots. Pointing at it. Story the end. It was almost 2 a.m. when Jackson Lerner's phone buzzed with a message from his night shift security supervisor at the old Heartwood Industrial Complex just outside St. Louis. He'd picked up the temporary job 2 weeks earlier after quitting his position at a local warehouse due to stress. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were flexible, and it gave him time to think, reflect, and try to reorient his life. Mostly he liked the solitude. The message was short. Someone's moving around B-Wing again. Motion sensor tripped. Check and report. Use caution. B-Wing. Again. The Heartwood complex had been an old manufacturing facility since the 1930s, decommissioned in 2012 and mostly abandoned since then. Now, only a few parts of it were leased to small operations, storage, equipment repair, and the occasional film crew. B-Wing, though, was off limits. The whole structure had been condemned due to a partial ceiling collapse years earlier. No lights, cracked support beams, vermin, and apparently someone or something kept setting off the motion detectors despite it being sealed. Jackson was used to false alarms. In the 2 weeks he'd worked there, it had happened 3 times. The first time it had been a raccoon. The second time, nothing was there. No animal, no wind drafts, nothing. The third time, he didn't find the courage to go past the corridor and just reported it as nothing found. His boss hadn't asked questions. Tonight, though, something felt heavier. The night was darker. The air felt wrong. There was a faint buzz in his ears as he walked down the shadowy hallway past the defunct vending machines and rows of broken lockers. He carried a flashlight and a company-issued 2-way radio. No firearm, just a baton he never used. He reached the double doors to B-Wing. They were sealed with caution tape and a rusted padlock. The lock was intact, but the door, slightly ajar. He froze. That padlock had always been looped through both handles, sealing the place shut. The only way to open it was with bolt cutters. He hadn't seen or heard anyone come or go all night. He was the only person on the property. He clicked on his radio. Dispatch, this is Jackson at B-Wing. Doors open. Lock is still attached, but not closed. I'm proceeding in. There was a short burst of static, then, copy that. Proceed with caution. Let us know what you find. The doors creaked open slowly. Jackson aimed his flashlight into the dark interior. The air was musty, filled with mildew and old metal. The beam of light barely cut through the darkness. He stepped in and was met with silence so total it seemed to press on his eardrums. B-Wing used to house the assembly line for industrial machinery. Now it was a skeleton of crumbling cement, dangling wires, broken catwalks, and collapsed beams. Jackson followed the corridor along the cracked floor tiles, his boots echoing softly. Then he heard it. A footstep. Not his. A soft shuffle somewhere deeper inside. "Hello?" he called out, already regretting it. No answer. He picked up his pace, sweeping the flashlight along the corridor, passing by rusting lockers and broken carts. He thought he caught a glimpse of movement just at the edge of the beam, something slipping behind a doorframe. "Hey!" he shouted again. "You're not supposed to be in here!" Nothing. He rounded the corner into what used to be a break room. It was now a pile of debris, a cracked microwave on the ground, half a sink, the remains of chairs melted into rubble. The flashlight flickered once. He banged it with his hand and it steadied. That's when the door slammed shut behind him. Jackson spun around, heart pounding. No one there. He jogged back to the door and pushed it open, nothing on the other side of it. No wind, no breeze, no explanation. But he felt it then, a deep coldness sinking into his bones, like he'd stepped into a freezer. It was the middle of July, and yet his breath was visible. Then his radio clicked on. Static. Then, "Jackson?" His supervisor's voice. Jackson brought it up quickly. "I'm here, in the break room. Something's not right. The temperature just dropped and a door closed on its own." Static again. Then, "She's awake." Jackson frowned. "Say again?" Static. He stared at the radio. "What did you say?" Nothing, just the hum of dead air. Suddenly, a loud crash came from down the hall, like metal collapsing. He ran toward it, the sound of his boots pounding through the dead air. He entered the main assembly area. Rusted scaffolding surrounded the floor, where a pit of machinery still sat, half buried in dust and rubble. At the center of it stood a figure. A woman. She was facing away, head slightly tilted. Her clothes were ragged, stuck to her in places as if damp. Her hair hung down in thick strands like it had been wet and dried hard. "Ma'am?" Jackson called out, his voice tight. No answer. He took a step forward. "Ma'am, are you hurt? You can't be here. It's dangerous." The figure remained still. He shined the light directly at her. The beam seemed to weaken, like the shadows around her absorbed the light. The edges of her body shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement. And then she turned. Her face was wrong. It wasn't mutilated or grotesque, but wrong. Her mouth too wide. Her eyes solid black. Not like she was possessed in a movie, like there was nothing behind them. No soul, just void. She didn't blink. Jackson staggered backward, heart hammering so hard it made him dizzy. Jesus, she opened her mouth. No words. Just a long, slow exhale, like the death rattle of someone who drowned. The flashlight flickered again and went dark. In that moment of total blackness, he heard movement, rapid, scraping movement like fingernails on concrete, rushing toward him. He screamed and ran. Down the corridor, back through the break room, into the hallway. He didn't look back. The air felt thick. The walls seemed closer, the shadows darker, like the building itself was closing in. He reached the outer doors and burst through, tumbling onto the cracked pavement, the humid summer night suddenly returning like a slap to the face. He looked back. The doors were closed. The padlock was looped through the handles again, snapped shut. Jackson lay there panting, sweat pouring down his face, not from exertion, but from fear. Deep, ancient fear. He didn't report it. The next morning, his supervisor asked, "False alarm?" Jackson simply nodded. Yeah, nothing there. But he didn't go back into B-Wing again. He kept working at Heartwood for another week. Then, one night, during his shift, he heard something outside, near the back lot. Curious, he went to check. There were footprints in the gravel, bare feet, leading to the chain-link fence and stopping there, no sign of anyone climbing over. He handed in his badge the next morning. A few months later, he did some research. Heartwood had a history. In 1978, a woman named Leslie Branford had been crushed during a machinery malfunction in B Wing. No one found her for over 2 days. By then, she was half pinned beneath a steel press. Her face had contorted in the final moments. Eyewitnesses at the time said it didn't look human. After her death, workers refused to use that wing. They said doors closed by themselves, machines powered up when unplugged, and a woman's voice could be heard whispering in the dark. Eventually, B-Wing was sealed, but the rumors never died. Neither did she, apparently. Jackson never told anyone the full story, not even his girlfriend, not even his therapist. But sometimes late at night, when his room gets unusually cold and the lights flicker, he feels like someone is just behind him, breathing, watching, waiting. Story the end. It was just after 2 a.m. when James left the bar. He was the last to leave, something that happened more often than not since his recent move to Saginaw, Michigan. The town was quiet that time of night, the summer heat still holding its grip on the pavement. Crickets chirped lazily, and the occasional rustle of trees hinted at raccoons or stray cats. James was used to the solitude. He liked it that way. He'd moved from Chicago for peace, for distance, for silence. But silence can be deceiving. He lived in a small rental on the edge of a wooded area. Not quite country, not quite town. The road leading to his place narrowed the farther you drove down it, finally ending in a gravel patch right outside the house. No streetlights, no neighbors for a good half-mile, just trees, the house, and whatever else the woods chose to hide. James stepped out of his car and paused before unlocking the door. Something in the trees didn't feel right. He couldn't see anything, but the night felt thicker than usual, like he was pushing against something invisible just by walking forward. He shrugged it off, maybe too many drinks, maybe not enough sleep. He opened the door and was hit by the familiar stale air of a house that had been locked up all day. Inside, the place was small and barely furnished. Couch, TV, some boxes still unpacked. He hadn't done much to make it feel like home. The back porch light was on, a dim, flickering yellow bulb that buzzed constantly. He flipped it off, deadening the hum. The silence that followed was almost worse. By 3 a.m., he had showered and collapsed onto the couch with an old movie playing at low volume. He rarely slept in his bedroom. Something about it made him feel watched. He'd laugh it off to his coworkers when they asked about his new place, but deep down, he avoided that room for a reason he couldn't quite name. As the movie played, his eyelids grew heavy. The fan spun lazily on the ceiling, ticking every few seconds like an old metronome. Just as sleep was creeping in, the noise came. It started with a soft thump, like a book falling. He opened his eyes and glanced around. Nothing on the floor. He figured it had come from outside. Then came the knock. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. He sat up. The knocks came again. 3 more, this time louder. It wasn't the front door, it was the back. James walked toward the kitchen, which led to the rear entrance. The porch light was still off. He peeked through the curtains but couldn't see anything through the glass. Another set of knocks. This time they rattled the glass. His first thought was that it was someone messing around. Maybe a neighbor pulling a late-night prank. Maybe some drunk from the bar followed him home. But that didn't make sense. No one knew where he lived. He slowly flipped the porch light back on and stared through the glass again. Nothing. The backyard was pitch black. The trees stood still. Then he saw it. A figure stood just at the tree line, maybe 20 feet back. Pale. Still. No defining features, just the outline of a person standing too straight, too still. James blinked. It was gone. He didn't go outside. Instead, he locked the door and went back to the couch. The movie was still playing, but the sound had cut out. He turned the volume up. Nothing. He tried another channel. Still nothing. Then the static started. White noise filled the room like a sudden storm. The TV flickered, then blacked out. His phone was on the table. He picked it up. No signal, no Wi-Fi. All he could hear was the tick of the fan. Then that stopped too. The silence that followed was the kind you feel, not just hear. He sat perfectly still, listening. From upstairs came a creak. He didn't move. Then another. Footsteps. Slow, measured. Walking across his bedroom floor. James stood, gripping his phone like it was a weapon. He quietly crept up the stairs, each step betraying him with a groan. The hallway was dark. His bedroom door was ajar. Inside, moonlight spilled through the window, casting pale light across the bed. Nothing looked out of place. He pushed the door open fully. The closet door was open. He hadn't opened it. He walked slowly toward it, heart thudding in his chest. Every step forward felt like being pulled deeper underwater. He reached out and flipped the closet light on. Nothing. Empty. He turned to leave. That's when he saw the footprint. One, faint and wet, on the wooden floor just outside the closet. A bare footprint. It pointed away from the closet toward him. He bolted down the stairs. The front door was still locked. The TV was still black. The fan still. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, everything was back to normal. Phone had signal. TV worked. Lights were fine. He told himself it was stress, or maybe someone had broken in. A sick joke. Something rational. Until the next night. It was 2:51 a.m. when he heard the whisper. He wasn't asleep. He was sitting in the living room again, watching TV with the lights on, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. But the whisper wasn't from the TV. It was in the room. It said his name. Soft, like a breeze curling around his ear. James. He froze. Then again, closer. James. He turned. No one there. The whisper moved. It was behind him, then in front, then right next to his ear. He grabbed his keys and rushed outside. His car wouldn't start. He tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dash were dead. He looked up. The figure from the night before was standing in his driveway. Closer now. Its features were clearer, but still wrong. The skin was too white, eyes too black, no mouth, no hair. It didn't move, didn't blink. James backed toward the house. The figure stepped forward. He ran inside and slammed the door. Locked it. Turned every light on. He didn't sleep. By the time morning came, the car worked. Everything worked. He decided to leave town for a while. Maybe a hotel, maybe back to Chicago. He didn't care. He just needed out. He packed that afternoon. Around 6 p.m., the power cut out. Then the lights flickered back on. All except one. The upstairs bedroom lights stayed off. He hadn't been in there all day. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up. The silence above was thick again. Then he saw it. A shadow, moving inside the room. Something was in there. He backed away. Then the bedroom door slammed shut. The house shook. He ran. This time, the car started. He didn't look back until he hit the main road. When he did, he saw a figure standing on the roof, watching him drive away. He got a hotel that night 2 towns over, but sleep didn't come easy. At 3:10 a.m., the fire alarm in the hotel went off, but no one else evacuated. No smoke, no fire, just him, standing alone in the hallway, heart racing. He returned to the room and found the TV had turned itself on. Static. He unplugged it. Still static. Then came the whisper again, this time from the bathroom. James. He opened the door. The mirror was fogged over. Someone had written something in the fog. Let me in. He didn't stay the night. He drove until sunrise. Over the next week, he bounced from motel to motel. He didn't return home. He arranged to have the rest of his belongings packed up by a moving service. Paid them extra not to ask questions. They called him 3 days later. Sir, your place is empty. Nothing's here. No furniture, no boxes. Looks like no one's lived here in weeks. James was stunned. What about the bedroom? He asked. Bedroom? That room? That room was boarded shut. James hung up without another word. He moved back to Chicago, to a small studio with constant traffic noise outside. He never stayed anywhere too quiet again. He kept lights on at night, even if it made sleep harder. Some nights, just before he dozed off, he still heard the whisper, right in his ear. James. Story the end. The old house sat on a dead-end street in a rural stretch of southern Indiana, nearly swallowed by woods on 3 sides. Locals called it the Albrecht Place, after the family that had owned it for generations before it went dark in the mid-90s. No one had lived there since, at least not for long. Every now and then, someone would buy it cheap and try to fix it up, but they never lasted more than a season. The property always went back up for sale, often abandoned without a word. I never really believed in ghost stories or anything like that. I figured people scared themselves with their own imaginations. My name is Eric, and about 8 years ago, I was just out of college, low on cash, and desperate for a place to stay. When my buddy Nate called me about a place his uncle owned and said I could rent it for next to nothing, I jumped. He didn't mention it was the Albrecht house until we pulled up the gravel driveway and the tree line opened into a clearing with the house looming dead center. It was bigger than I expected, a two-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and peeling paint. The windows on the upper floor were covered with plastic sheeting that fluttered in the wind. It looked forgotten, and the way the wind moved through the trees made the whole place feel like it was holding its breath. Nate said, "Place has got charm, huh?" I laughed nervously. "Looks like a damn horror movie." "Yeah," he said, shrugging, "but it's livable. Just don't expect too much company." That first night, I didn't unpack much. Just tossed a sleeping bag on the floor in the downstairs bedroom, made sure the locks worked, and lit a few candles since the overhead bulbs didn't seem to do much. The power was technically on, but it flickered and buzzed, and the fixtures looked like they hadn't been updated since the 60s. Around 2 in the morning, I was jolted awake by a loud knock, 3 distinct raps on the back door. The bedroom was down the hall from the kitchen where the door was. I waited, breath held, thinking maybe it was the wind or a tree branch. But then it happened again. 3 knocks. Slow, firm. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the kitchen, heart pounding. Through the fogged window, I could barely make out anything, but there was no one on the porch. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack, shining the light out. Nothing. No prints, no signs of movement. Just a breeze rustling the leaves. I told myself it was an animal or maybe old wood shifting. I locked the door again and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, the doorknob was ice cold and damp to the touch, even though it hadn't rained. Over the next week, strange things started happening. I'd hear footsteps upstairs when I was alone, even though I hadn't unpacked anything into the upper rooms. Doors would close by themselves, and lights flickered even when the switch hadn't been touched. One night, the bathroom mirror had a handprint on it, small, like a child's, but I hadn't had any guests. I called Nate and told him about it. He laughed and said, "Yeah, my uncle mentioned something about it being haunted, but I figured he was full of crap. You're probably just spooked because it's old." I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then, one night in late October, I had a dream so vivid it made me question everything. I dreamed I was standing in the upstairs hallway, staring into the mirror above the staircase. Behind me was a woman with long black hair, her eyes milky white, mouth open as though she was screaming. But I heard nothing. I turned around in the dream and she was gone, but I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. That would have been just a nightmare, if not for what I found when I got up to get water. The mirror from the upstairs hallway, it was leaning against the wall in the downstairs foyer even though I'd never moved it. I tried to convince myself I had just forgotten that maybe it was already there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I finally did some research at the local library, digging into old microfilm and newspaper archives. That's when I found out about the Albrecht family. In 1963, the youngest daughter, Sarah, disappeared from her upstairs bedroom in the middle of the night. Her room was locked from the inside, windows shut tight. No sign of forced entry. Her body was never found. A few years later, her mother hung herself in the hallway outside that same room. Neighbors claimed she had gone mad with grief, saying she heard Sarah calling to her at night from inside the walls. The family slowly fell apart after that, and by the early 80s, the house had changed hands several times, each time with similar stories of strange noises, cold spots, sightings of a woman in white. I stopped sleeping upstairs altogether after that. I moved all my stuff into the downstairs bedroom, nailed shut the stairwell door, and tried to keep my mind occupied. But whatever was in that house didn't care about doors. One night I was in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard soft crying. It was faint, but definitely human. Female. It came from the hallway just beyond my room. I got up, flicked on my flashlight, and slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty. The crying stopped the moment the door creaked. As I stood there, I felt something cold brush against my ankle. I jumped back, heart in my throat. Nothing was there. But the air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. That was the first night I saw her. I was back in bed, facing the wall, when I rolled over and saw her standing in the corner. A woman in a white nightgown, long dark hair covering her face, motionless. My breath caught. I blinked. She was gone. I lay there for the rest of the night, every nerve in my body alive and raw. At dawn, I packed a bag and drove to Nate's place. He didn't look surprised when I told him what I saw. I didn't want to tell you before, he said, but a friend of mine tried to spend the night there last year. He said he saw a little girl in the mirror, said she mouthed something to him. He left in the middle of the night and refused to go back. I tried to stay away after that, but I still had stuff there. Laptop, clothes, paperwork, and it was too much to just abandon. I told myself I'd go back one last time in the middle of the day, grab what I could, and leave. I got there around noon on a Saturday. The house looked darker than usual, like the windows were tinted. As I walked through the front door, the air felt cold, stale, like the heat had been sucked out. I moved quickly, stuffing clothes into bags, yanking cords out of outlets. Everything was quiet, no footsteps or whispers. I started to relax. Then I heard a faint voice. Eric? It was a whisper, high-pitched, a child's voice. Eric, come upstairs. I froze. The voice came again, clearer this time. Please help me. I'm cold. I should have left. I knew it. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, pulled me toward the stairs. The door I had nailed shut was wide open, hinges creaking softly as though it had just been opened moments before. I climbed the steps slowly, each one groaned under my weight. At the top, the hallway was darker than it should have been, and the door to Sarah's room stood open. Inside, it was freezing. My breath came out in visible puffs. The furniture was still draped in old sheets, dust thick on every surface. Then I saw her, sitting in the corner, facing the wall, a little girl, knees to her chest, hair hiding her face. She rocked back and forth, whispering something I couldn't make out. Sarah, I asked, my voice barely audible. She stopped moving. Then she turned her head. Her eyes were empty. Not like someone blind, just gone. Hollow sockets. Her mouth opened, impossibly wide, and a sound came out that I still can't describe. Not a scream, not a cry, something deep and guttural, like it came from under the earth. I ran. I didn't even take the stairs, just leapt down them in twos, tripping, scraping my arm on the railing. I bolted out the front door, never looking back. I didn't care about my laptop, my books, or anything else. I got in the car and drove until the house was miles behind me. I never went back. Nate told me a few months later that the house had caught fire during a lightning storm and burned down. No one was inside. They say it was abandoned. But sometimes I still dream about it. I see her standing at the foot of my bed, face hidden behind her hair, whispering my name. Every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of her in a mirror, just for a second, standing behind me, before she disappears. I've moved 3 times since then, and I've never told anyone else about this until now. I still don't know exactly what happened, but I know what I saw. I know what followed me home that night. And I know that once you've seen something like that, once you've felt that kind of cold reach into your soul, it never really leaves. Story the end. The summer of 2003 was supposed to be one of the best for me. Fresh out of college, armed with a new job and a modest paycheck, I decided to take a solo road trip through some of the less traveled back roads of rural Virginia. I wanted to escape the city noise, disconnect from everyone, and just be alone with my thoughts for a few days. Little did I know that trip would turn into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. My plan was simple: drive out past Charlottesville, meander through the mountains, camp under the stars, and then circle back. I packed a small tent, enough food for a few days, and my camera gear. I wanted to capture the untouched beauty of those parts: misty mountains, quiet rivers, and sleepy small towns where time seemed frozen. After a long day's drive, I found myself on a narrow 2-lane road winding through the George Washington National Forest. It was late evening, and the sun was setting fast. The trees on both sides cast long shadows, their branches swaying with the gentle wind. The sky was turning a deep shade of indigo, and a crescent moon was beginning to peek through the thinning clouds. I spotted a small clearing just off the road, perfect for setting up camp. There was a dirt pull-off, an old wooden sign partially covered by vines that said Black Hollow Trail. I didn't know much about it, but it looked inviting enough. I parked my car, grabbed my gear, and began pitching the tent. The first few hours were peaceful. I cooked a simple meal over my small camping stove, took some photos of the forest canopy, and wrote a bit in my journal. The forest noises, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, were soothing. It was exactly the escape I needed. But then, just past midnight, everything changed. I was sitting by the campfire, the warm glow flickering on the trees around me. The night was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I noticed the usual chorus of insects had gone silent. The forest had fallen into an unnatural stillness. Then I heard it, a soft tapping sound like fingers lightly drumming on tree bark. I looked up, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight, but saw nothing. The tapping continued, rhythmic, steady, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly stood up. The beam cut through the black, revealing twisted roots and fallen leaves. I followed the sound cautiously, stepping off the trail and into the thicker trees. The tapping grew louder and more distinct, almost like someone was trying to get my attention. As I moved further from the clearing, the air grew colder, the scent of pine and earth replaced by something metallic and stale. After walking for about 5 minutes, the beam of my flashlight landed on something that stopped me cold. It was a wooden chair, an old, weathered rocking chair sitting alone in a small clearing surrounded by gnarled trees. The chair was moving, rocking slowly back and forth as if someone had just stood up. I shined my light around the clearing, expecting to see someone hiding or playing a prank, but the place was empty. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. The tapping started again, now coming from the ground near the chair. I knelt down, shining the light on the dirt. There were footprints, but not fresh. They looked faded, partially erased by time, but the impressions were deep, like heavy boots had pressed into the soil. My heart rate quickened. Suddenly, the rocking chair stopped moving. The forest fell completely silent again. And then, from behind me, I heard a voice. Barely a whisper, but clear. "Leave. Leave." I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, but the woods were empty. "Who's there?" I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. The tapping started again, this time coming from all around me, like dozens of fingers drumming on trees, on rocks, on the earth. It was deafening. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, falling hard onto the ground. Scrambling to my feet, I turned and ran blindly through the dark woods toward the campfire. When I burst into the clearing, the fire was out. I fumbled to relight it, hands trembling. That's when I noticed something else. There, on the edge of the clearing, half buried in leaves and dirt, was a small, rusted tin box. I didn't want to touch it, but something compelled me to pick it up. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were old photographs, black and white images of people from long ago. Families posed in front of houses, children playing, a man in a military uniform. One photo caught my eye. It showed a group of men standing in front of a log cabin, their faces somber. At the center was a young woman holding a baby. On the back of the photo, someone had written in fading ink, "Black Hollow Massacre, 1923. I swallowed hard. I'd heard stories before, rumors about an old family feud in this area, ending in tragedy. But I never believed them. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me. The tapping stopped, and then from the woods a soft lullaby began to float on the cold air. A woman's voice, low and haunting. I couldn't make out the words, but it was the saddest thing I'd ever heard. I stood frozen as the voice grew louder, closer. Then I saw her. A woman stepped into the clearing, translucent and shimmering under the moonlight. She wore a tattered white dress stained with dirt, her long black hair hanging in wet strands over her pale face. Her eyes were hollow, dark wells that seemed to swallow the light. She stared right at me. I felt my legs go weak. She reached out a hand, beckoning. "Help us." The voice was barely more than a breath. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The woman took a step forward, then another, moving closer with an unnatural glide. The forest around me twisted. The trees bent inwards like watching eyes. Shadows lengthened, reaching toward me. Then, from the depths of the woods, I heard screams. Dozens of them, echoing from all directions. I fell to my knees, heart hammering. The woman's eyes filled with tears of blood. "Don't forget us," she whispered. Before I could react, a cold hand grabbed my ankle, pulling me toward the dark forest floor. I screamed and kicked, breaking free. I ran without looking back, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. The lullaby faded, replaced by the angry screams and tapping. When I finally reached my car, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. The headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the twisted trees, but the clearing and the woman were gone. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her standing there, watching. Years later, I learned the truth. In 1923, a family was brutally murdered in Black Hollow. The woman in the photo was the mother, trying to protect her children. The killer was never found. Locals say her spirit haunts the woods, forever searching for justice. I never went back. And sometimes on quiet nights, I still hear the tapping like fingers on bark, calling me back to Black Hollow. Story the end.